Seat 2A, a throne of plush leather and limitless legroom nestled in the exclusive quiet of the first-class cabin. For 17-year-old Amara Sterling, it was more than a comfortable chair for a transatlantic flight. It was a symbol of her father's pride, a celebratory gift for landing a prestigious internship in London. But for Brenda, the lead flight attendant on Aura Air Flight 712, a young black girl in that seat was a mistake, an anomaly, an error in the system to be corrected. She saw a problem, not a passenger, and she was about to make the biggest mistake of her career, one that would unravel a web of deceit and threaten to bring an entire airline to its knees. The air in the terminal at JK was a familiar cocktail of stale coffee, jet fuel, and hurried anxiety. Amara Sterling, however, felt a calm excitement bubbling beneath her composed exterior. She clutched the strap of her leather satchel, a gift from her mother, and double-checked the gate number on her phone. Gate B24, Flight 712 to London Heathrow. She navigated the throng of travellers with the practiced ease of someone who had been flying since she could walk. Her father had insisted on first class. "You've earned it, sweetheart." Robert's voice, rich and warm, echoed in her memory from their call last night. "This internship at the Tate is a huge deal. I want you to arrive rested and ready to conquer the world." She smiled at the thought. Her father always believed she could conquer the world. He was her hero, a man who had built an empire from sheer will and brilliance, yet always had time for her science fair projects and basketball games. At the gate, the boarding process had already begun. The priority lane for first class and platinum members was a short, sparsely populated line. Amara joined it, standing behind a man in a crisp suit who was barking into his phone about quarterly earnings. The gate agent, a woman with a name tag that read Susan and a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes, scanned the businessman's ticket and waved him through. Amara stepped forward, offering her phone with the digital boarding pass displayed. Susan's eyes flickered from the screen to Amara's face, then back to the screen. A tiny frown creased the space between her eyebrows. "Flight 712 to London?" she asked, her tone flat. "Yes, that's right," Amara replied politely. Susan tapped a few keys on her computer, her frown deepening. "Seat 2A? Yes." The agent looked up again, her gaze more direct, this time sweeping over Amara's stylish but comfortable travel attire, a cashmere hoodie, designer jeans, and immaculate sneakers. It was a look of subtle appraisal, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. Amara had seen that look 1,000 times. It was the look that questioned her presence in certain spaces, advanced placement classes, boutique stores, and apparently first-class airline lounges. "Can I see some identification, please?" Susan asked. The request wasn't unusual, but her tone made it feel like an accusation. Amara calmly pulled her driver's license from her wallet and handed it over. "Amara Sterling," Susan mumbled, comparing the name on the ID to the ticket. She handed it back without another word, her expression still clouded with a vague suspicion. "Enjoy your flight," she said, the words automated, devoid of the warmth she'd offered the man before her. Amara brushed it off. It was a minor annoyance, a paper cut of prejudice she'd learned to ignore. Her excitement returned as she walked down the jet bridge. The plane, a gleaming Boeing 777, bore the elegant silver logo of Aura Air, her father's company. She felt a swell of pride. This was his world. Stepping onto the aircraft, she was greeted by a flight attendant named Kevin, a young man with an eager-to-please smile. "Welcome aboard," he chirped, glancing at her boarding pass. "First class is to the left. Brenda will take care of you." Amara turned left, entering the serene cocoon of the first-class cabin. It was all muted greys and silver accents, the seats more like individual pods than simple chairs. She spotted seat 2A, a window seat, and was about to move toward it when a voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the quiet hum of the cabin. "Can I help you?" The voice belonged to a woman in her late 40s, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, perfect chignon. Her uniform was immaculate, her lipstick a slash of crimson. Her name tag identified her as Brenda, the lead flight attendant. Her eyes, a cold, pale blue, held the same calculating expression as the gate agent's, but magnified with an air of authority. "Hi," Amara said, holding up her phone. "I'm in 2A. Brenda's smile was a thin, brittle thing. "I believe you might be mistaken. The economy cabin is further down the aisle to the right." Amara's own smile faltered. "No, I'm sure this is correct. Seat 2A. She held the phone out for inspection. Brenda didn't even glance at it. Her gaze was fixed on Amara, a flicker of something disdain perhaps in her eyes. There must be an error. Sometimes passengers get confused. It's a big plane. The condescension was thick enough to taste. Amara felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, but she pushed it down, channeling her father's unshakable calm. "There's no confusion," she said, her voice even. "My ticket is for this seat." A passenger who had just settled into seat 3C, an older gentleman with a kind face, looked over with mild interest. Brenda finally deigned to look at the phone, but only for a second. "That's a first-class seat, miss." She said the words slowly, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. "I'm aware," Amara said, her patience starting to fray. "It's my seat." Brenda let out a small, patronizing sigh. She beckoned Kevin, the junior attendant, over with a flick of her wrist. "Kevin, could you please assist this young lady? She seems to have lost her way and ended up in our cabin." She turned her back on Amara, beginning to fuss with the decorative pillows on an empty seat, the dismissal as clear as a slap in the face. Kevin approached, his eager smile now looking more like a nervous grimace. "Ma'am, maybe if we just check at the gate again, sometimes the scanners." "There's nothing wrong with the scanner," Amara interrupted, her voice gaining a steely edge. "There's something wrong with you and her assuming I don't belong here." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and uncomfortable. Brenda spun around, her mask of politeness dropping to reveal naked hostility. "Now you listen to me," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I have been with this airline for 22 years. I know a legitimate first-class passenger when I see one. You are holding up the boarding process. Either show me a real ticket, or I will have you removed from this aircraft for causing a disturbance." The threat was absurd, a wild escalation that left Amara momentarily speechless. She wasn't causing a disturbance. She was trying to take her assigned seat. It was Brenda who was creating the scene, her voice drawing looks from the other first-class passengers, who were now trying very hard to pretend they weren't listening. Amara looked at Brenda's cold, triumphant face and Kevin's anxious one. She saw the truth of the situation with sickening clarity. Her ticket didn't matter. Her eye didn't matter. All they saw was a black teenager in a place they felt she had no right to be, a flaw in the perfect, privileged tapestry of their first-class cabin. And they were determined to remove her. The quiet sanctuary of the first-class cabin had become a theatre, and Amara was the unwilling star of a humiliating play. The hum of the auxiliary power unit seemed to amplify the silence that followed Brenda's threat. Every passenger was now acutely aware of the conflict unfolding in the aisle. Amara could feel their stares, a mixture of curiosity, discomfort, and pity. "A real ticket?" Amara repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "This boarding pass was issued by your airline at your check-in counter and scanned by your gate agent. How much more real does it need to be?" The gentleman in 3C, who had been watching with growing concern, cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a calm baritone. "I don't mean to interfere, but the young lady has a valid boarding pass. Perhaps you should just let her take her seat. We're all eager to get on our way." Brenda shot him a withering glare. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a crew matter. Please remain seated." She turned back to Amara, her posture rigid. "We have reason to believe this boarding pass may be fraudulent." The word fraudulent landed like a physical blow. It was a formal, ugly accusation, escalating the situation from an assumption to a direct charge of criminal intent. "Fraudulent," Amara's voice rose slightly, tinged with disbelief. "On what grounds? Because I don't fit your profile of a first-class passenger." We've had an increase in incidents, Kevin chimed in, trying to sound official, but just coming across as Brenda's parrot. People using sophisticated methods to create fake documents to access premium cabins. So, you're accusing me of being a criminal, Amara stated, not as a question, but as a confirmation of their position. She looked from Brenda's smug face to Kevin's nervous one. This was a coordinated effort. This was their story, and they were sticking to it. We are simply following security protocols, Brenda said smoothly, recovering her composure. She crossed her arms, a classic power stance. Our policy is clear. If a crew member has a reasonable suspicion about a passenger's documentation, we are obligated to investigate. Now, who purchased this ticket for you? The question was a trap layered with insulting implications. That she couldn't have possibly purchased it herself. That it was a gift from a boyfriend, or worse, stolen. The insinuation was winsome. Amara's jaw tightened. She refused to be interrogated like a common thief. That's none of your business. The ticket is in my name, Amara Sterling. My identification confirms I am Amara Sterling. That is all you need to know. It is very much my business. Brenda snapped, her patience finally gone. This is my cabin. I am responsible for the safety and security of everyone on board. And right now, you are a security concern. She pulled a tablet from a storage compartment and began tapping at it furiously. I'm checking the passenger manifest. I'm willing to bet there's been a system glitch. A moment later, her face soured. Well, she muttered, clearly disappointed, the name is on the manifest. But she wasn't ready to concede. Her mind was already racing for another angle. But that doesn't explain how it was booked. Tickets like this are expensive. Often they're purchased with stolen credit cards. This was their new line of attack. The accusation shifted from a fake ticket to a stolen one. Amara felt a surge of white-hot anger, but she held it in check. Losing her temper was exactly what they wanted. It would validate their narrative of her being disruptive and aggressive. She took a slow, deep breath, forcing herself to think clearly. Arguing with them was pointless. They were an echo chamber of their own biases. They held all the immediate power. She needed a different solution. Fine, Amara said, her voice laced with ice. If you refuse to honor my ticket, then what is your proposed solution? The plane is scheduled to depart. Brenda's thin smile returned. She had won. We have a seat available for you in the economy cabin. We can place you there for the duration of the flight while we clarify the situation with our ground staff regarding the payment for this ticket. If it all checks out, she said this with a heavy dose of skepticism, we will discuss compensation later. It was the ultimate humiliation. To be publicly accused of fraud and then banished to the back of the plane. It was a modern-day back-of-the-bus moment, and the bitterness of it stung her to the core. No, Amara said firmly, that is not an acceptable solution. I will not be moved to another seat. This is my seat. I paid for it, or rather it was paid for. Then I'm afraid you'll have to deplane, Brenda said, her voice final. She gestured toward the open aircraft door. We can have Port Authority officers meet you on the jet bridge to discuss the fraudulent documentation further. The mention of police was the final straw. They were threatening her with arrest over a plane ticket, her plane ticket, on her father's airline. The gentleman in 3C stood up. This is outrageous, he declared, his voice resonating through the cabin. I am a 30-year platinum member with this airline, and I have never witnessed such unprofessional and discriminatory behavior. Her name is on the manifest. Let the girl sit down. Brenda's face flushed with anger at being challenged again. Sir, I'm warning you. Sit down or you will be removed as well for interfering with a flight crew. The man, whose name Amara would later learn was Mr. Henderson, looked incredulous, but slowly sat back down, shaking his head in disgust. He caught Amara's eye and gave her a look of support. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. She wasn't entirely alone, but she was cornered. They had backed her into a place where her only options were public humiliation or arrest. Her mind raced. She thought about her father. What would he do? He wouldn't yell. He wouldn't argue with fools. He would use the power he had, quietly and effectively. A slow, cold resolve settled over her. They wanted to play a game of authority. Fine. It was time to call in a higher authority. Okay, Amara said, her voice calm again, unnervingly so. She held up her hands in a gesture of surrender that was anything but. You're right. You've left me with no choice. Brenda's expression was one of pure, unadulterated triumph. She thought she had broken the insolent girl. Kevin, Brenda commanded, please escort Miss, whoever she is, off the aircraft. Kevin stepped toward her, his expression a mix of relief and unease. That won't be necessary, Amara said, pulling her phone from her pocket. I just need to make one quick call before I go anywhere. Brenda scoffed. A call to whom your lawyer? Go ahead. You can call him from the terminal. Amara looked directly into Brenda's cold blue eyes. A small, knowing smile touched her lips for the first time. It was a smile that sent a tiny, imperceptible shiver of doubt down Brenda's spine. No, Amara said. Not my lawyer. I'm calling my father. Brenda let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure derision. Your father. And what is he going to do? The implication was clear. What power could the father of a girl like that possibly have? I guess we're about to find out, Amara replied, her thumb already scrolling through her contacts. She found the name she was looking for, Dad. She pressed the call button and lifted the phone to her ear. The first-class cabin was now silent enough to hear a pin drop. The remaining passengers, Mr. Henderson included, watched with rapt attention. Brenda stood with her arms crossed, a smirk fixed on her face, ready to enjoy the final act of this pathetic drama. Kevin hovered nearby, looking increasingly uncomfortable, as if sensing the ground was about to shift beneath his feet. The phone rang once-twice. Amara's heart pounded in her chest, a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She hated doing this, hated leveraging her father's position. She had always striven to succeed on her own merits, but this was no longer about her pride. It was about dignity and a deep foundational injustice that she could not let stand. Amara, honey, is everything okay? Robert Sterling's voice came through the phone, filled with its usual warmth, but with an undercurrent of concern. She wasn't supposed to call him right before takeoff. Hi, Dad, Amara said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Sorry to bother you. I'm on the plane, but we're having a bit of a problem. Brenda rolled her eyes dramatically, making sure the other passengers could see her performance of exaggerated patience. A problem? What is it? Did you leave something behind? Robert asked. No, nothing like that, Amara said, keeping her eyes locked on Brenda's. The flight attendants on my flight, Aura Air 712, are refusing to let me take my seat. They've accused me of having a fraudulent ticket and are threatening to have me removed from the plane. There was a moment of absolute silence on the other end of the line. Amara could practically hear the gears turning in her father's mind, the shift from concerned parent to powerful executive. When he spoke again, the warmth was gone, replaced by a tone of chilled, lethal precision. Give me their names, Amara. The lead attendant is Brenda, she said, never breaking eye contact with the woman. The other one is Kevin. Okay, Robert said. Put the lead flight attendant on the phone. Amara held the phone out to Brenda. My father would like to speak with you. Brenda scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. I am not speaking to your father. This is a security matter, not a family dispute. Tell your daddy to buy you a ticket you can afford next time. The cruelty of the remark was stunning. Amara simply relayed the message, her voice flat. She says she won't speak with you. Another pause. I see, Robert said, his voice now dangerously soft. All right, Amara. Don't worry. Stay right where you are. Do not get off that plane. I will handle this. I'll call you back in 5 minutes. The line went dead. Amara lowered her phone. He'll call back, she said to Brenda, whose smirk had widened into a look of outright mockery. "I'm sure he will," Brenda said sarcastically. "The clock is ticking. You have 5 minutes before the captain calls security. Maybe your father can talk to them." She turned to Kevin. "Make sure she doesn't wander off." The next few minutes were the longest of Amara's life. She stood in the aisle, a statue of defiance, while the flight attendants pretended to busy themselves with pre-flight checks, occasionally shooting her triumphant looks. Mr. Henderson offered her a silent, encouraging nod. Amara focused on the silver Aura Air logo on the bulkhead. Her father had designed that logo. He'd told her it was meant to represent a halo, a promise of a higher standard of service. The irony was suffocating. Less than 3 minutes later, a small chime echoed through the cabin, followed by the voice of the captain over the intercom. "Flight attendants, this is Captain Thompson. Lead attendant, please report to the flight deck immediately." Brenda's smug expression flickered. A call to the cockpit before the doors were even closed was unusual. She shot Amara a final venomous glare, as if this were somehow her fault, and then disappeared behind the cockpit door. Kevin stood awkwardly in the aisle, avoiding Amara's gaze. The atmosphere in the cabin had changed. The smug certainty was gone, replaced by a new, palpable tension. Something was happening. Through the thin cockpit door, muted but frantic voices could be heard. The tone was not conversational. It was stressed, urgent. After another 2 minutes, the door opened and Brenda emerged. Her face was a mask of horror. All the colour had drained from it, leaving her skin a pasty, sickly white. Her crimson lipstick stood out like a gash. Her composure, once so unshakable, had completely shattered. Her eyes, which had been so cold and dismissive, were now wide with panic. She looked at Amara not as a problem to be solved, but as if she were seeing a ghost. She stumbled slightly as she walked, making her way toward Amara on unsteady legs. Her hands were trembling. Miss Sterling," she stammered, her voice a hoarse whisper. The change was so drastic it was jarring. "There has been a terrible mistake, a misunderstanding." Kevin stared at her, his jaw slack with confusion. He had never seen Brenda like this. "Please," Brenda begged, her voice cracking, "please accept our deepest apologies. Your seat, 2A. Of course, it's right this way." She gestured toward the seat with a trembling hand, her earlier imperiousness replaced by a desperate fawning servility. Amara simply stared at her, unmoved by the pathetic display. "What happened to my ticket being fraudulent?" she asked, her voice cold and clear. "What about the Port Authority officers?" Brenda flinched as if struck. "It was a system error. A communication breakdown. I was wrong. I was completely and utterly wrong. Please, miss. The CEO, She couldn't finish the sentence. The name hung in the air, unspoken, but understood. It was in that moment that Kevin finally understood. His face went ashen. He looked at Amara, then at the phone in her hand, and the pieces clicked together in his mind with the force of a tectonic plate shift. Sterling, Amara Sterling, Robert Sterling, the founder and CEO of Aura Air, the man whose picture was on the wall in every crew lounge. He felt a wave of nausea. He had followed Brenda, backed her up, added his own little barbs to her accusations. He hadn't just stood by, he had participated. "Please," Brenda said again, her voice now pleading. "We are so sorry." Amara looked at their terrified faces. She felt no satisfaction, no joy in their fear. She just felt a profound, weary sadness. She walked past them, without a word, slid into the plush comfort of seat 2A, and stared out the window, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a response. The empty apologies meant nothing. The damage was done. The cascade had begun, and she knew with chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. The rest of the boarding process was completed in a state of surreal tension. Passengers from the economy cabin filed past their faces, a mix of impatience and curiosity, sensing the lingering drama that clung to the air in first class. Brenda and Kevin moved like automatons, their smiles pasted on their movements, stiff and unnatural. They looked like ghosts haunting their own workplace. Brenda, who had moments before been the undisputed queen of the cabin, now seemed to shrink with every passing second. She avoided Amara's side of the aisle completely, tasking another flight attendant, a woman who looked utterly bewildered by the sudden shift in dynamics, to serve the passengers in rows 1 and 2. Kevin was even worse. He was visibly trembling. Every time he had to walk past Amara's seat, he would fix his gaze on the overhead compartments, his face pale and slick with sweat. He fumbled a pre-departure drink order for another passenger, nearly spilling orange juice on a briefcase. Amara sat by the window, the city lights of New York blurring, as the plane finally pushed back from the gate nearly 30 minutes behind schedule. She didn't want their apologies. She didn't want their terrified deference. She wanted the last half hour of her life back. She wanted to erase the memory of their sneering faces and the feeling of utter helplessness. As the plane ascended into the dark sky, the seatbelt sign pinged off. Mr. Henderson, the gentleman from 3C, unbuckled his belt and walked over to her seat. He knelt slightly in the aisle so he wouldn't be speaking down to her. "Young lady," he said, his voice soft and kind. "My name is Arthur Henderson. I just wanted to tell you that I saw everything, and I was, and am, thoroughly appalled. The way you handled yourself with such grace and fortitude. It was remarkable." Amara finally looked away from the window, offering him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot. Thus, if you need a witness for anything that comes of this, and I suspect something will some," he continued, slipping a business card from his jacket pocket, "please do not hesitate to call me. What they did was not just unprofessional, it was wrong on a fundamental human level." Amara took the card. "Arthur Henderson, Senior Partner, Henderson and Crow, LLP. A lawyer, of course." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I really appreciate this." He nodded, gave her a paternal pat on the shoulder, and returned to his seat. His simple act of solidarity was a balm on her wounded spirit. The 7-hour flight stretched on in an atmosphere of excruciating awkwardness. The new flight attendant assigned to Amara's section, whose name was Maria, was almost comically attentive. "Miss Sterling, can I get you anything? Another blanket? A pillow? More water? Are you comfortable?" she asked every 20 minutes. Amara understood that Maria was just trying to do her job, likely under strict orders to provide impeccable service, but it felt suffocating. Brenda remained in the galley for most of the flight, hidden from view. Amara caught a glimpse of her, once her face buried in her hands. There was no triumph in seeing her tormentor so broken. There was just a hollow feeling in the pit of her stomach. This woman, in her desperate attempt to enforce some imaginary social hierarchy, had not just humiliated a passenger, she had detonated her own life. Kevin, on the other hand, seemed to be going through a full-blown crisis. At one point, he approached Amara's seat, his hands clasped in front of him like a penitent monk. "Miss Sterling," he began, his voice barely a whisper, I have to say, I am so sorry. There is no excuse for my behavior. I followed Brenda. I thought she knew best. But what I did, what I said, it was inexcusable. I'm ashamed of myself." And his apology felt more genuine than Brenda's panicked reversal, born of fear for his own future rather than hers. Amara looked at him, a young man who had made a terrible choice, likely out of a desire to fit in or impress a superior. "You didn't just follow," Amara said, her voice soft but firm, refusing to let him off the hook so easily. "You participated. You accused me of being a criminal." Kevin flinched, tears welling in his eyes. "I know, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. I just wanted you to know that I know it was wrong. It wasn't about a ticket. It was about me being a coward." He scurried away before she could respond, leaving Amara with his clumsy confession. It didn't make her feel better, but it did shift her perspective slightly. Brenda was the architect of the malice. Kevin was a weak-willed accomplice. Both were culpable, but their sins felt different in weight and texture. She tried to sleep, leaning her head against the cool glass of the window, but her mind was a whirlwind. She thought about her father. He had been so calm on the phone, a quiet storm. She knew him well enough to know that beneath that calm was a deep well of fury. Not just the fury of a father whose child had been hurt, but the fury of a CEO whose core principles had been violated by his own employees. He had built Aura Air with a vision of inclusivity and excellence. The name Aura was meant to signify the positive energy and respect with which every passenger should be treated. Brenda and Kevin hadn't just insulted his daughter, they had defiled his entire philosophy. As the first light of dawn broke across the Atlantic, tinting the clouds in shades of pink and orange, Amara knew this was far from over. The reckoning was not what happened in the cockpit. The reckoning awaited them on the ground. When the plane landed at Heathrow, the drama on Flight 712 would be over, but the consequences were just about to begin. The silence from her father was not a sign of forgiveness. It was the quiet before the storm. The descent into London was smooth, the city, emerging from the morning mist like a watercolor painting. As the plane taxied towards the terminal, the captain's voice came over the intercom once more, but this time his message was unusual. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at London Heathrow. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate and the seatbelt sign has been switched off. A special announcement will be made for deplaning procedures. A low murmur went through the cabin. This was not standard protocol. Amara looked out the window. Instead of pulling up to a jet bridge, the plane was being guided by ground vehicles to a remote stand far from the main terminal building. A set of mobile stairs was already being rolled into position. Waiting at the bottom of those stairs were several figures in dark suits. One of them was unmistakable even from a distance. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a posture that radiated quiet authority. It was her father, Robert Sterling. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, washed over Brenda and Kevin. They exchanged a look of pure terror. This was not a meeting in a sterile corporate office next week. This was happening now, on the tarmac. The plane shuddered to a halt. The engines whined down into silence. The seatbelt sign pinged off. First-class passengers, please prepare to deplane first, the captain announced, his voice strained. Miss Amara Sterling, you will be deplaned first. The entire cabin watched as Amara gathered her satchel. She walked to the front of the plane, her expression unreadable. She didn't look at Brenda or Kevin, who stood frozen near the galley, their faces bloodless. The aircraft door was opened by a stern-faced ground crew supervisor, revealing the grey London morning and the small delegation waiting below. As Amara appeared at the top of the stairs, Robert Sterling's face broke into a smile of pure relief and love. He met her at the bottom, enveloping her in a hug that was both paternal and protective. "Are you okay?" he whispered into her hair. "I'm okay now, Dad," she whispered back, feeling the tension of the last several hours finally begin to melt away in his arms. He held her for a moment longer, then his expression hardened as he looked up toward the plane. Brenda Adams and Kevin Peterson. He called out his voice, not loud, but carrying with an unnerving clarity that cut through the airfield noise. "Please step off the aircraft. Now!" The two flight attendants emerged looking like prisoners being led to their execution. They descended the stairs cautiously, their eyes fixed on the man who signed their paychecks. The CEO they had only ever seen in corporate videos was now standing before them, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. Alongside Robert stood two other individuals, a severe-looking woman Amara recognized as Eleanor Vance, Aura Air's head of European operations, and a burly man who was clearly head of corporate security. Brenda and Kevin stopped a few feet from the group, unable to meet Robert's gaze. Robert Sterling ignored them for a moment, turning to his daughter and Mr. Henderson, who had deplaned right after her. "Arthur," Robert said, shaking his hand warmly, "thank you for looking out for my daughter. I received your text. Your account of the events was illuminating." "Robert, it was the least I could do," Mr. Henderson replied, his expression grim. "What I saw was a disgrace to your airline." "An assessment with which I wholeheartedly agree," Robert said, his voice dropping an octave. He finally turned his full attention to the two trembling employees. "I founded this airline on a simple principle," he began, his voice low and intense, "that everyone who steps onto one of our planes is treated with dignity, not just as a customer, but as a human being. A principle you seem to have forgotten." He took a step closer. "You didn't just insult a passenger. You didn't just cause a delay. You stood in a cabin bearing my company's name, and you accused my daughter, any passenger, of being a liar and a thief, based on nothing more than your own rancid prejudices." Brenda finally found her voice, a pathetic squeak. "Mr. Sterling, sir, it was a mistake, a terrible lapse in judgment. We are so sorry." Robert held up a hand, silencing her instantly. "Save it. Your lapse in judgment is part of a pattern, isn't it, Brenda?" Brenda's eyes widened in fresh panic. "How could he know?" "While you were flying over the Atlantic," Robert continued, his voice like chipping ice, "I had our internal audit team pull your cabin reports for the last 12 months. It turns out you have a remarkable talent for discovering ticketing irregularities with certain passengers, haven't you? Specifically passengers you deem unlikely to complain. You downgrade them, claim a system error. And then, what happens to that empty first-class seat?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. The head of security took a step forward. "We have reason to believe," the security chief said in a gravelly voice, "that you and Mr. Peterson have been engaging in unauthorized cash upgrades for standby passengers, splitting the money between you. You create a problem, then you sell the solution. We have 3 separate incident reports from the last 6 months alone that corroborate this theory. Your little scam ends today." The revelation struck Amara. It wasn't just about bigotry, it was about greed. The prejudice was the tool they used to select their victims, the ones they thought were powerless, the ones whose protests would be most easily dismissed. Her presence in that seat wasn't just an offense to their worldview. It was a threat to their illicit side business. Kevin looked utterly destroyed, his face crumpling in despair. Brenda was speechless, cornered by a truth she never imagined would see the light of day. "Brenda Adams, Kevin Peterson," Robert said, his tone now utterly devoid of emotion. "As of this moment, your employment with Aura Air is terminated. Your credentials and IDs will be confiscated. You will be escorted from airport property. A full-scale investigation into your fraudulent activities will begin immediately, and Aura Air will be pursuing all available legal charges against you, including theft and wire fraud." He turned to Eleanor Vance. "Eleanor, I want every flight attendant, every gate agent, every single customer-facing employee in this entire company to be retrained. I don't care what it costs. This culture of bias, conscious or unconscious, ends now. I want a zero-tolerance policy with real teeth. This can never ever happen again." "Yes, Robert," she replied, her face grim. Robert looked back at the 2 disgraced former employees. "You didn't just lose your jobs today," he said, the finality of his words echoing across the tarmac. "You disgraced the uniform. Get them out of my sight." The security chief nodded, and he and another agent flanked Brenda and Kevin, gently but firmly guiding them towards a waiting vehicle. Their careers were over, their lives irrevocably altered by a toxic mix of prejudice and greed. As Amara watched them go, she didn't feel victorious. She just felt an overwhelming sense of relief that it was over and a deep, abiding pride in her father. He hadn't just protected his daughter, he had protected the integrity of everything he'd built. The events of Flight 712 did not remain a quiet internal matter. News travels fast in the interconnected world of aviation, and a story this dramatic was bound to leak. Within 48 hours, an anonymous source, later presumed to be another passenger from the first-class cabin, who had been disgusted by the incident, tipped off a major news outlet. The headline was explosive. Airlines EO's daughter faces discrimination on his own flight. Crew fired on tarmac in fraud scandal. The story went viral. Aura Air's stock took an immediate punishing hit. Social media erupted with a firestorm of outrage, with hashtags like Flying While Black and Aura Air Shame trending for days. Passengers shared their own stories of discrimination on various airlines, turning Amara's personal ordeal into a global conversation about systemic bias in the travel industry. For Robert Sterling, the public relations nightmare was secondary to the deeper, more painful issue. The incident had exposed a cancer within his own company that he hadn't known existed. He refused to issue a bland corporate statement. Instead, he faced the crisis head-on. He scheduled a press conference and stood before the world's media, not as a defensive CEO, but as a humbled leader and a concerned father. He didn't make excuses. He didn't downplay the severity of what happened. What happened to my daughter Amara was a failure at every level. He stated, his voice resonating with sincerity. It was a failure of our protocols, a failure of our training, and a failure of our culture. The fact that it was my daughter is irrelevant. It could have been anyone's daughter, and it is my personal responsibility to ensure this never happens to any passenger on any Aura Air flight ever again. He then announced a series of sweeping, immediate changes. The first was the termination of not only Brenda and Kevin, but also Susan, the gate agent at JFK, whose initial suspicion had set the entire ugly chain of events in motion. The internal investigation had revealed her own pattern of flagging minority passengers for random secondary screenings at a disproportionately high rate. The legal consequences for Brenda and Kevin were severe. Faced with irrefutable evidence from the airline's audit and testimony from passengers on previous flights who were located during the investigation, they were charged with multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. Their story became a cautionary tale, not just about prejudice, but about the foolishness of believing such acts could remain hidden forever. But Robert's most significant move was the creation of a new company-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion program. It was a multi-million-dollar initiative focused on intensive scenario-based anti-bias training for all 30,000 Aura Air employees. He announced that the entire program would be overseen by an independent civilian review board, and in a move that brought tears to Amara's eyes when she heard it, he named the entire initiative the Amara Project. My daughter showed more grace and dignity under pressure than I could ever have hoped for, he told the press. Her name will no longer be associated with an incident of discrimination, but with the solution. It will be a permanent reminder of our commitment to change. Amara finished her internship in London with distinction. The ordeal had changed her. She had always been aware of the subtle currents of prejudice in the world, but coming face to face with such overt malice had forged a new kind of strength in her. When she returned to the United States to start college, she switched her major from art history to sociology and pre-law. She found she had a voice and she wanted to use it. She started speaking at youth conferences and writing articles about her experience, not to dwell on the hurt, but to advocate for the kind of systemic change her father was implementing. She became a passionate advocate for corporate accountability and social justice. Her quiet composure, now a powerful tool for advocacy. The consequences for those who wronged her were swift and decisive, a direct result of their actions. But the true resolution wasn't found in their downfall. It was found in the powerful, positive ripples that spread from one ugly incident. It was in the thousands of employees undergoing training that would change the way they saw the world. It was in the passengers who would now fly without fear of being judged by the color of their skin. And it was in a young woman who, after being told she didn't belong, stood up and, with the help of her father, began to rebuild that world into one where everyone did. 3 years later, the world had moved on. For Amara Sterling, it had moved forward into a future bright with promise. For Brenda Adams, it had simply stopped. The crisp, professional uniform of Aura Air had been replaced by the cheap polyester polo of a regional discount grocery chain. The scent of exclusive cabin perfume was now the smell of disinfectant and overripe bananas. Brenda spent her nights stocking shelves in the harsh fluorescent glow of the store, a ghost haunting the aisles of canned goods and cereal boxes. She was anonymous here. No one knew the name Brenda Adams, or if they didn't connect it to the woman from the infamous viral news story. She had changed her last name, moved to a different state, and cut her once perfect blonde hair into a nondescript, mousy style. Her life was a flat line of survival. A small, bleak apartment, instant coffee, and the dull ache of a resentment she nurtured like a secret flame. The legal battle had bankrupted her. The fraud conviction, a permanent stain on her record, made finding any decent job impossible. Kevin, her former accomplice, had taken a plea deal, testified against her about the full extent of their upgrade scam, and received a much lighter sentence of probation and community service. She hadn't heard from him since. In her mind, he was just another name on a long list of people who had betrayed her. One evening during her break, she sat in the sterile employee lunchroom, scrolling through a newsfeed on her cheap smartphone. And then, she saw her. It was a picture of Amara Sterling. She was no longer a 17-year-old girl in a hoodie, but a poised young woman in a blazer standing at a podium. The headline read, "Amara Project founder Amara Sterling delivers keynote at National Civil Rights Symposium." Brenda's breath caught in her throat. She tapped the article, her finger trembling slightly. She read about Amara now, a top student at Yale Law School, and her work with the foundation her father had established. The article quoted Amara. "Bias is a learned behavior, and it can be unlearned. It requires us to listen when someone tells us we've hurt them, to look onward at our own assumptions, and to have the courage to build something better in the place of our ignorance." A hot, acidic bitterness rose in Brenda's chest. My ignorance, she thought, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. She ruined my life. Her and her billionaire father. In the lonely echo chamber of her mind, she was still the victim. She had been a loyal employee for 22 years. She had been good at her job. She knew the rules. The world of first class had its own unspoken order, and Amara Sterling, in her view, had disrupted that order. Brenda had simply tried to restore it. The fraud, the cash upgrades, that had been a separate thing, a way to get what she felt she was owed, a little bonus for all her years of thankless service. She refused to connect the two. In her narrative, the prejudice was a justifiable security concern, and the fraud was an unrelated minor indiscretion that had been blown out of proportion. She saw Mr. Henderson's face in her memory, his righteous indignation. She saw the fear on Kevin's face. But most of all, she saw Amara's calm, unshakable composure. It was that composure that haunted her most. The girl hadn't screamed or cried. She had simply made a phone call and brought Brenda's entire world crashing down. It felt to Brenda like an unfair fight, like someone using a secret weapon she never knew existed. A younger co-worker sat down across from her, munching on a bag of chips. "Rough night?" he asked, noticing her expression. Brenda just shook her head, forcing a tight smile. "Just tired." And she couldn't explain that she was trapped in a 7-hour flight that had ended 3 years ago. She couldn't articulate the profound humiliation of being so utterly wrong, not just about a ticket, but about the fundamental distribution of power in the world. She had bet her entire career on an assumption, and the loss was total. That night, as she walked home under the buzzing streetlights, she thought about the final words Robert Sterling had said to her on the tarmac. "You disgraced the uniform." He hadn't just fired her. He had judged her, found her unworthy of the very identity she had built her life around. The real consequence, she was slowly beginning to understand, wasn't the conviction or the dead-end job. It was the silence. It was the absolute and irreversible erasure of the person she used to be. The pride, the authority, the sense of belonging to an elite club. It was all gone, replaced by this hollow, invisible existence. She had tried to render Amara Sterling invisible in that cabin, to erase her from a space where Brenda felt she didn't belong. Instead, she had only succeeded in erasing herself. The echo of her own hateful words was the only company she had left. A single moment of prejudice on Flight 712 set off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. It wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about the deeply ingrained biases that we as a society still battle every single day. Amara Sterling's story is a powerful testament to the strength of quiet dignity in the face of loud bigotry, and a stark reminder that true accountability goes far beyond a simple apology. It requires a fundamental commitment to change from the tarmac to the boardroom. The world was watching, and for once the consequences were as significant as the offense. If Amara's story of dignity and the pursuit of justice resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video so that her message of resilience can reach others who may have faced similar injustices, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that matter. What do you think should be the ultimate price for prejudice? Let us know in the comments below.